All right, our guest tonight, which we are so honored to have, is Carle. I believe that's how you pronounce her last name. Carole is the oldest daughter of Walter R. Carle and Louise Carle. Carole's birth was actually announced in the Hollywood Reporter, as her father was then a news director and television news broadcaster in that city. Her mother sang on live radio and also was a disc jockey back in the day. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, where the family moved when she was a child, Carole began doing musical theater in high school, and community theater followed. Eventually, the family moved back to Los Angeles, where Carole found professional work and joined the Actors Equity Association, the Stage Actors Union, and the Screen Actors Guild. Her highlights include performing with the National Company on A Clear Day You Can See Forever, opposite John Raitt, Howard Keel, and understudy Tammy Grimes. Also, she did some work with Robert Redford in a movie called Downhill Racer. She worked with Leonard Nimoy in Mission Impossible. And she is also, her and her husband, they do music.
Oh, cool.
And maybe we will play a little of their music if she will allow us to.
Yeah, cool.
She is, of course, also has a fascinating interest with everything paranormal. She was interested in the paranormal since age 12.
Okay.
She's into UFOs, spirits, Fortean phenomenon, and so much stuff. Tonight we're going to talk about the Fox sisters and a whole heck of a lot more.
Is it Carole or Carole?
It's Carole.
Okay, good.
So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get her on the line. Carole, good morning. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show.
Good morning, good evening,
morning.
good afternoon, both of you. This is amazing and so looked forward to on my part. First of all, both E's are silent. They're just there for no reason. It's Carle. I don't know, go figure. But no, I'm just so incredibly pleased to be here, and what you all, offer here at IRN and what we have in chat is, everybody agrees, is just about the most unique thing on the planet.
Well, we're so glad to have you.
Well, we are, and you and the whole gang in Inception Radio, but then, of course, now you're being heard all up and down the Wasatch Front, the entire Salt Lake Valley, and north and south, and
which is one of my most amazingly,
tons.
I love that, up and down the Wasatch Front. That is just such poetry. I really, every time I hear that, that's like, whoa. Yeah, write a book about that.
Well, it's really not, Carole. It's actually the hind end of the Rocky Mountain chain. But that's what it's called. It's the Wasatch Front.
You mean the Butte? Is that what you? Oh my gosh, how unpoetic! Oh dear. But no. Wow. So okay, well, I don't know. You want me to just jump in, or
I did give a little bit of your background. I read your bio.
I was going to say good evening. Thank you very much, folks. Thanks for coming. Okay, good night. See you. Wow. But enough about me. Seriously, I had no idea that would be read. Okay,
No. But why don't
you need to give us your backstory?
Why don't you give us a little bit of the backstory? I mean, go ahead. Tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
You know the routine.
Yeah,
you know
you do.
Right, okay. Well, listen. Well, as somebody once pointed out, I think it was MJ and Bob Tarmac. They pointed out, if somebody wasn't, if you're dancing on the radio, nobody's going to know if you're really using your feet. Okay.
That's true.
So here we go. We can do that. But no. It's an amazing story. This story of the Fox sisters. Shall I just jump into that? Is that what you want?
Yeah. Well, let me back it up.
Sure.
Let me back it up a little bit more. Now, obviously,
you bet.
You're into ufology and paranormal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So when did that start for you? When did your interest in that start?
I gave you something in my bio, and then I thought, no, that was wrong. It really was this. I was fortunate to have a family summer cottage that we had access to for a while, and when I was 9, we went up there one summer, and this was Portage Lake, which is off of Manistee, Michigan, and it opens by a channel into Lake Michigan. Gorgeous timber country. My grandparents on my father's side were in lumber, and so there was this cottage, it was 2-story plus kind of thing, not really what we call a cottage, but on the amazing screen porch was a stack of magazines. They were old, out of print, some National Geographic, but then there was something called Collier's Magazine, and in Collier's Magazine, I stumbled upon the original The Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, and I just, had my parents known, of course, that I was reading this, I think probably they would have discouraged it, Don't clutter up your head, that kind of tends to be dark, blah blah blah. Well, but anyway, that was me, me and science fiction. That was it forever.
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then of course the film, eventually they came along, the Invasion of the Body Snatchers film, or I eventually saw it, is really how it turned out. And we had a family friend who's in a group scene in that film, and she was kind of my godmother. So that was, that's another kind of connect.
Very, very
a woman named Eileen Stevens. And so I don't know, a huge fan of Fortean things and phenomena like that, stuff that goes back way, way, way back. Have an old clipping of an airship that was seen over Manistee, Michigan, over
Really?
this same cottage area. Yeah, in fact, I actually had the privilege of reading that on Paying Radio to MJ and Bob many months ago. But it's unfortunately it was clipped out without that little headline date thing. But based on what's on the other side, it would have been about 1899 at the very latest. And it was an airship, so I did some a little search online, and there were many other things seen in that area during that particular time. So.
Well, and Michigan has Michigan.
there.
It is beautiful country.
Isn't it?
We had a summer home up when I was young up in Saugatuck, Michigan.
Oh, right, sure. There's a famous theater up there.
There is the Red Barn.
The Red Barn. That's right. Yes, I had friends who worked there. Right.
And not as of recent, but back not that many years ago, as far as ufology and UFOs go. Remember, they had all of the southwestern UFO sightings, a lot over Lake Michigan, a lot of activity in St. Joe and all those areas.
Right, and isn't that the the famous and I can't pin it to a city, the swamp gas? Didn't that really wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. So swamp gas. Well.
So a lot of things happen in there without a doubt.
Right, many.
So you've had Fortean stuff. We've had different. Do you subscribe or read to Fortean Times at all?
No, I come across it every so often, and when I do, I kind of go, "Oh, this is just this is amazing." It's something that is just definitely an ongoing source of information. And I think you can actually even do it online. I think, can't you?
You can, yeah. Yeah. We've had, matter of fact. We've had a couple of the different Adam Go Rightly and a few of the other people from Fortean
I have
on the
his
show.
Site bookmarked. Yes, right.
Yeah.
I've got it.
Yeah, we've actually had him on the program, and very, very interesting the way the group looks at things. So you started obviously you've been into all these unique things for a long time.
Yes, I've been the local, strange one, the one with the admitted interest. Listen, I think there's a lot of folks who, as we kind of like, we're pretty much in the chat room hip to this thing of, wow, you just can't talk about, you can't go into a room, full of people you don't know and just kind of, talk about this stuff at the drop of a hat. Well, you can, but you might not exactly like the reaction you get. And so it's sort of a, however, has that changed, and is that changing? That's an amazing thing.
Well, it is, and people are, and people are just being so open-minded and more accepting to these different subjects, and we'll get into some different things here tonight or this morning. But again, things have really changed, Carole, compared to where they were. Now, I mean, when you had interest in this when you were 12 years old, sometimes, of course.
It was just a desert. It was, it was like, wow, you get through the stuff at the local library, and then it's kind of like, well, you're depending on old movies and, older magazines and things like, well, I'm not going to mention because I just don't want to step on anybody's toes, but periodicals that, while they definitely had their hearts in it, might have kind of pushed things one way or the other. You weren't getting, you weren't getting as much objectivity as I always kind of wanted, and so but the fiction, even the fiction stuff, there wasn't anything, because this goes back to for wonderful series like Dark Shadows, okay, like vampires, well, only in the old stuff, and we had to just be satisfied with that.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
It is.
So let's talk a little bit about, and you're going to have to give us definitely the backstory on the Fox sisters.
Yes.
And I did find a site about them, but why don't you go ahead and start from the ground?
Well, I will, and speaking, by the way, to begin with, about finding sites, this is an amazing thing. Before, I would say probably as early, although I didn't really recognize it, quote, or call it research on my part yet. I was already sort of sleuthing around on the internet because I had remembered hearing about the Fox sisters and tying their names to some interesting things and some overlapping coincidence stuff that was, in the social scene at the time. And that would be the feminist and the abolitionist movements, which were just so overlapping. I mean, sometimes down to the very date. There were people who knew each other in these relatively small circles of people, and that's kind of amazing politically. But on finally searching and finding the Fox sisters and sort of centering on that, what I found out was, number one, there wasn't that much information online, and it was so apparent that about halfway through my search, there was a lot of disinformation or misinformation. You decide. I don't want to think of this as really a conspiracy, but there was what almost seemed like an effort to minimalize the Fox family themselves in terms of even where they lived and what they were doing there. They were, the reference was they were poor, itinerant peppermint farmers. Mm-hmm. Well, they lived in peppermint farming country, that's true, but they weren't peppermint farmers. They were not itinerant. They were living in that house while they were having a house built nearby for themselves. It was a house that was used as a rental. And it had a really interesting dark story and history, and that's kind of where this all centers. But there was, for instance, no real attempt to get the story out there initially that the Fox family were pillars of the community. Their eldest son, David, was married to Elizabeth Culver, whose parents had sort of started Hydesville. By the way, this is Hydesville, New York. I forget to say that. Hydesville, and it was named for Henry Hyde. And in fact, the cottage where this all took place was owned by Artemus Hyde, who was the son of the founder of the town. And so this cottage would be lived in for various periods of time by various people. During the time it has come to my attention, there were three groups of people who lived there. The first people, they were the couple and their hired girl who lived there from time to time, and they were the ones responsible for the dark behavior that led to the murder of Charles B. Rosna, that led to your spirit contacting the Fox sisters. Are you still there?
Uh-huh.
Hello?
Okay. We're just listening. Yeah, it's great.
I know. Listen, rein me in when you want.
No, go ahead.
The vaudeville hook, okay. So the house itself, before the Fox family lived there, it was occupied by a family briefly named Weekman, who had two young daughters under the age of 12, and the girls were upset by nightmares and by things that were happening in the night, something to do with very cold, a hand on their face in the night, and, things that are, were very disturbing. And so they moved. And the next family in was the Fox family. And they had two young daughters, Kathy, who was also called Katie, Catherine, and she was 11, and her sister Margaretta, called Maggie, who was 15. And their mother Margaret and their father John. John and Margaret Fox had a long, complicated relationship, and they had children who ranged in age, or raged maybe too, I don't know. From their daughter Leah, who is definitely a pivotal player here, and she was 24 years old at the time of this, and we're talking about March 31st, 1848. That's where we are now, in Hydesville, New York, which became Newark, New York, which is about, let's see, from Buffalo to Hydesville is about, probably 293 miles. Now, at the same time, just to back up as I'm looking at the map, on perhaps the 29th, maybe the 30th of March, for the first time ever in recorded history, Niagara Falls stopped flowing.
Really?
Yeah, and exactly, that's the pitch. When I saw this online, that is exactly what I sounded like, and because who knew? And it had to do with some relatively rare occurrence of the, I'm sure it's physics involved here, the flow of the lake and the temperature of the water and how much ice had frozen, and so it had narrowed to a trickle. And on the morning that this first manifested itself, Buffalo woke up to this silence. And down in the bottom were all these things sticking up out of, this little tiny bit of ice that was left on the bottom. There were wagon wheels, there were Prussian cannonballs and swords and old parts of old Revolutionary War, apparatus. And it was just really an astonishing thing. People were finding coins and all kinds of souvenirs. And then, of course, it resumed and started again. Now, it started again on March 31st. Now, on the evening of March 31st was the ultimate, absolute, if you want to say, breakthrough of the contact of the spirit of Charles B. Rosna, who had been murdered in the cottage where he makes himself known. And he made himself known to the Fox family big time. He had been rapping on the walls, his spirit. I'm just going to tell it from this, okay? I mean, you decide. We can come down in a whole bunch of different directions. It's just easiest for me at this point to convey it as though this is like the actual factual. Okay, okay.
Perfect.
Charles had been murdered in the cottage on that site. It was believed later that the connection to the stopping of the falls, in other words, utter incredible silence, may have allowed some kind of spiritual breakthrough. And so, I don't know, water, electricity, energy, but it's just kind of, it's an interesting thought, and I have no idea whether that could ever, to this day or in this day and age ever be established with any kind of basis. I have no idea what that was all about. But on the evening of March 31st, after putting up with rapping noises that would shake the bed frame, that would be heard on one side of the door, but nobody would be on the other side of the door. This has gone on for almost 2 weeks. On the evening of March 31st, they just couldn't stand it anymore. They got out of bed. The girls were so frightened. They were 11 and 15, but they were so frightened that their bed had been pushed into the big room where they all slept together with their parents out of fear because of these noises. Now, these noises, I'm going to say, pretty much were, at least in my mind, they were connected to whatever kind of energy was visiting the two previous little girls who lived there. In other words, perhaps the spirit was going to be contacting two girls in that space at that site, but it was just the wrong family.
Right.
So here is the Fox family. The Fox grandmother had a history. This is the maternal grandmother. The original name, by the way, was Voss, German, and then anglicized to Fox. And they came from relatively southern Canada and then moved down into the Hydesville area. But their grandmother had some interesting occurrences, such as kind of knowing the time someone was going to die, and often having precognitive dreams regarding funerals. And it wasn't just someone who was, obviously on their way out. It was, unexpected things. So it was thought perhaps this could be some kind of genetic situation.
Interesting. Very
it
interesting.
is amazing that long ago.
Right, exactly. And so we get back to the evening of March 31st, when they got up, lit candles, began to walk around the place. This time they were just going to they were so determined they were going to get to the bottom of this. And one of the girls thought to snap her fingers. And she snapped her fingers in a rhythm, and the spirit responded. And then they clapped their hands, and the spirit responded. And it gradually, just to cut to the chase, became a situation of a code of back and forth.
Right.
Using the alphabet that, we just don't have enough time. Okay,
sure.
But, to be able to do that. But they arrived at some incredible, now how I know this, okay, is there are many sources. We were my husband Ted and I were incredibly lucky to be able to get our hands on something that is the actual deposition put together by an attorney by the name of E.E. Lewis, Lewis, out of Canandaigua, New York, who I'm pretty sure he was a 35-year-old lawyer. I'm sure he sensed some sort of amazing opportunity here, and so he came over on April the 11th, and he deposed a whole bunch of the principals involved in this. And I'll tell you, it is amazing. It is the most vivid kind of material, in spite of the fact that a lot of it's archaic. And somehow or another, thank you very much, Internet, we got our hands on what is an amazing copy of this. It was a pamphlet, and its original title. Do I have the original title here? The
awesome.
Noises and Mysterious Wrappings. Of course I don't. Here it is. Okay. A report of the mysterious noises heard in the house of Mr. Fox in Hydesville, Arcadia, Wayne County, authenticated by the certificates and confirmed by the statements of the citizens of that place and vicinity.
So it was all kind of taken at, at face value, because obviously
awesome.
back then you couldn't record stuff like that.
Right. No.
But was this guy like a lawyer? Almost?
Yeah, that was a lawyer. He was
exactly. He was E. Lewis Esquire. Thank you very much. And yes, and so this is an amazing document, and it's just it has the statements of some stuff that I haven't yet touched. You want to know about the murder part?
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, that's awesome that you have that, though.
Yeah, exactly. And I just, so we have several copies here, and they're kind of all, spread out on this table in front of me. But at any rate, it's amazing. We also found a copy online of the story from the, I believe it's the Boston Journal, of when they, well, I'll just cut to this other chase, since it's not really a plot spoiler for something because March 31st will be 166 years since, this all took place, which is kind of amazing. But in 1904, they actually found the bones. Just in exactly, I know I'm skipping a big chunk, but you can probably, figure it out. The girls were told by the spirit where the bones were, and even though there were attempts to find them early on, they just didn't have it wasn't technology that found them. It was some children playing near the spook house, as it was called. They bumped into a wall, and there he was with his tin box, exactly where he had told the girls he was.
Interesting, kind of like, that.
It's so cool that it's so far
talking
back.
about being able to to communicate with the dead.
Oh, I know, and it's. That's just that's something that there is more, of course, than to skip another part. There's something that a lot of people know about, and we can, go back and forth. And if you, just please, as I say, stop me, whatever.
No, you're doing fine.
There is, there is the famous, or if you know much about this, and if you happen upon, and if you're interested and you do a search under the want to know more, you're going to probably run into some stuff such as the famous, quote, confession that Maggie made in the 1880s. She was very unhappy. She had issues with alcohol. Her father had the same kind of issues, and all three sisters at certain points in their lives did struggle with alcohol dependence and overuse. And so it was very interesting. In the 80s, Maggie was coerced, leaned upon, bribed. They really were not financially well off at all at this particular point, and there was enmity among them. And someone approached Maggie and told her there was something in it for her to take herself to, I believe it was the New York Academy of Music or some such, and go on stage. This is kind of brutal. She went on stage. Here it is, verbatim, from a periodical of the time. She offered, all right, just to backtrack, it was said that the raps produced by the spirit were really produced by, it was said by detractors, that the raps produced by the Fox sisters were really the girls popping the joints in their toes, popping their fingers, and popping their knees. And in spite of attempts to prove otherwise by really literally tying the girls at the ankle and knees, tying their hands, blindfolding them, putting them in other people's clothing, this really happened, so that there could be no kind of device hidden among their clothes, the petticoats of the day. This is we're talking 1848, and so when they found nothing, all they could do, of course, then was hurl more invective. But these attempts found nothing. This was 1849. Now let's cut to the 1880s, and here's desperate Margaret. And she was, she was coerced in my mind by doing the following. She offered a demonstration, removing her shoe and placing her right foot upon a wooden stool. The room fell silent and still, and she was rewarded with a number of short little raps. Quote, "There stood a black-robed, sharp-faced widow," the New York Herald reported, quote, "working her big toe and solemnly declaring that it was in this way she created the excitement that has driven so many persons to suicide or insanity. In one moment the show was ludicrous, the next it was weird." All right, and so then apparently before she left the stage, she thanked God that she was able to expose spiritualism. Well, it didn't last long, and less than a year later she recanted. She said, I did this under duress. I was offered these financial rewards, and I was desperate, and this is what happened. Well, my gosh, isn't that the classic, thing? It's cliche that nobody reads the retractions,
Right.
And so there we are. And it was even referred to as, there's a book by the title of something like The Death Knell for Modern Spiritualism, the fact that she did this confession, which she recanted. And, of course, that's not as widely known,
It's interesting because they're like pioneers of like psychic and paranormal stuff. It's
exactly.
They were totally, Carole. They were, and what happened was amazing. They began to, in fact, the girls from the very beginning, they were not on board for this. It was kind of like, what's going on here? Their older sister Leah was not living at home at the time of this. In fact, this is an interesting thing that some people find confusing. Apparently, in those days, which would have been the early 1840s, it wasn't too uncommon, or in this case, the late 1830s, too uncommon for a middle-class young woman to marry really early. I mean, like 14 or 15.
Really?
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fringe Radio Show. Our guest tonight is Carole. Carole, thank you so much for taking the time to be here tonight and sharing all this with us.
Yes.
Oh, hey, this is just absolutely my pleasure on this St. Patrick's Day, by the way, Pat. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Well, thank you, although it's over.
Yes. His
well, I know where you are. Yes, it's over. Still kind of here for me, just a little. Wait, I don't know. I don't know. Time's flying. I'm not going to look at the clock. I'm leaving it to you guys.
Oh, you're doing fine.
His
we got
mom's
plenty
so
to
sweet.
go.
She celebrates St. Patrick's Day because of Pat. It's so
That's
cute.
Right.
There we go. Well, hey, I kept thinking, what can I tie? There's no Irish tie to this story. I was looking, and well, there was the Pat and Patrick. Oh, heck, what do you know? So, all right, I like that. So.
Well, ours is Christmas, right? So, Carole, there we go.
There we go. Yes, we've got that. We sure do.
Got the bigger holiday there.
Right. Absolutely. Many more days. Aha. Well, anyway, that's mean, but we won't do that.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Well, so where did we? I don't know. Is anybody out there listening? I don't know. I'm not sure where we left off.
Well, no, we were just talking about again about the first of all, a lot of people thought it was a hoax, and then it wasn't.
Yes, it wasn't. And I did during the break I did find that the amount that she was paid to do this was $1,500, and in 1888 to somebody who is in pretty dire straits. That's. And she also, by the way, was angry with her sisters at that point. There, as I said, there was enmity among the three of them, and as kind of how could there not have been? And but Leah, I know, that's what it was. I was talking about Leah and how she got married very young, and she married a much older man, and she became a mother when she was about 14 years old. So when this all began to happen, she had a daughter who was about 10 years old. Not very much younger than her sister, Kathy, which is kind of cute. There were three girls about the same, from 10 to 15. Although Elizabeth, who was the eldest Fox daughter's daughter, was not really exactly a part of this. She was kind of removed from the scene at some point and never really got into mediumship. And speaking of the daughters and mediumship, their youngest daughter, Maggie, it's said that she went to live as a spiritualist contact with Horace Greeley and his wife. I believe her name was Susan. The Go West young man.
Yes.
Horace Greeley. He was a tremendous supporter of spirit, the starter of what, the New York Tribune, is it? He was a huge supporter of spiritualism and the Fox sisters specifically, and actually offered to pay for the education of Kathy, who was the youngest daughter. But apparently Maggie, the next youngest, also spent some time with them. They lost a child very young, apparently, the Greeleys, and believed that spiritual communication was very possible, and I don't know whether they felt they directly communicated or not. But you see, it's the fact that such pillars of the community, Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, and Isaac and Amy Post, who were huge Quakers and in the Underground Railroad movement, were also big-time supporters of the Fox sisters and spoke out, on their behalf frequently. So they were Hicksite Quakers, the Posts. But, it's one of those things that has become lost kind of through time, but also even the intention of the moment is a little questionable, because what began to happen, and who knows how this affected, if you will, the powers that be. I don't know. See, that kind of sounds conspiratorial. I don't always want to go there for sure, but for instance, the idea that was put forth by the Fox sisters that we can all do this to some degree. All humans have the ability to contact crossed over spirits. And as Ann Leah, the eldest sister, says in her book, which is another amazing thing that we got our hands on, I don't know how many copies there are, but it's called The Missing Link in Modern Spiritualism, and she publishes under the last name Underhill. She was able to have in her life this very steady influence toward the end of her life, a man named Daniel Underhill, who was, of all things, in the insurance trade in New York, and he was a little older, and I guess a believer in spiritualism, but he kind of, I think, was a ballast to her. And she writes this book, The Missing Link of Modern Spiritualism, and in it she addresses what is the point of communication with the crossed over. And her point was that it took the sting out of death. It took the victory away from the grave, that it gave a sense of there is no death, there are no dead, and which is part of, here's another segue, the segue to Andrew Jackson Davis, who the Poughkeepsie seer, a huge person in the spiritualist movement, apparently a year to the day before the girls were contacted, March 31st, 1848, by the spirit of Charles Rosna. So that would have been, the end of March, 1847. Andrew Jackson Davis was contacted with the fact that there was going to be a divine message given, and it would come to two young people, and it would be in approximately this area of the United States. And the message that would be proclaimed was, there is no death, there are no dead. When you do your duty, God will protect you, and good angels will guide you. Pretty soothing, pretty amazing.
It is. I got a question for you.
Yes, I hope I have an answer.
Through your research and all of this, did you ever come across anybody that accused them of being practicing witchcraft or being witches?
There's a very interesting allusion to that, using that very word, and that's always been a hard one for me, because in my I think it's back to when we were all younger, and certainly when you hear about witches as a child, I never put witches, and even though I don't really like them, Ouija boards, I never put those two things together. But I'm looking for you here, Pat, because there's probably, of course, I won't be able to find it, but there is some allusion that I just noticed this afternoon for the first time in a well, of course I can't find it, in the chapter heading in Ann Leah's book here, and she mentions witches. Now, the problem is that witches, at least in this country and in popular stuff, are, what I just thought about. This is completely wrong. Think about the people who you had on from Crone's Hollow. Boy, do they break the stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they do. And
they're just, because I was thinking we for the most part, here are used to equating in the Western world witches with, I don't know, black, evil, dark doings,
right.
blah, 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 rather than the Wiccan, pagan, naturalist, harmony with nature, alchemical herb kind of thing. And so, I don't know. I wish I could find this and answer that question for you specifically, Pat, but she does, there is an attempt early on when seances first began to happen. That's what I was sort of leading to, was that everybody can do it kind of a thing. You too can have your own, and it became an upper-class deal to have a huge party, rather than a musical salon where people would, get together and do various piano, harpsichord, blah, blah kind of performances and sing. It became the rage to have a seance and a party, and sort of, that upscale kind of thing. So from the idea that everybody can do this, I'm not sure. I wonder if there's a crossover thing in everybody thinking, or perhaps in the uninformed thinking, well, it's a coven, it's a group of witches. Those are who gets together and talks about such. I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's just, at that time period, people, we're a little bit further down the road at that time, but talking about witches being burned at the stake, and people were, when you're talking about paranormal back then,
right.
Witchcraft was definitely, today it's defined and understood a lot differently. Yeah. But back then, any of this stuff, I think while there was interest, it probably was a couple of things. There was either, interest, the scientific community looking at it with a lot of interest, trying to put a scientific answer to it. And, of course, I'm sure there was fear. Again, the witchcraft stuff, maybe Satanism being practiced. Back then, you just didn't talk about that stuff.
Well, sure, you didn't. And you could your cow could die, your crops could fail, and sort of, and then then of course, so it's like who is it who was just recently widowed, and well, she's and then see, that's the thing now as far as witches are concerned. At one point, there were actually people in the town of Hydesville who wanted to go after the Fox sisters and lynch them. Mm-hmm. They wanted to lynch them, and because they believed that they were, I don't know, this just went right out of my head, but here it is again. They believed they were talking with Satan.
Right.
And so that was early on, and that was the girls before they had the highlight of the girls' lives was not to be really until November of 1849. And they were requested by Spirit through a seance communication to rent this enormous place called Corinthian Hall in Rochester. It's amazing. It was 3 stories tall, and the inside is lavish. There's an etching of an amazing dinner going on. Spirit instructed the Fox sisters to hire this hall in Rochester, New York, and give an exhibition proving that they were not wrapping their toes, wrapping their kneecaps. They were not doing anything to their hands that were producing these noises. And excuse me. And by golly, they did. After 3 days, no one was able to find that they were doing this. And at the end of that time, it was kind of a 3 cheers for the Rochester girls, and they had proven themselves. And at that point, they began to sort of go public. They couldn't do anything else. The eldest sister, Anne, could not any longer, called Leah, could no longer give piano lessons in her home in Rochester because, my gosh, something's liable to start tapping on the walls, and that's understandable. But she had no way of supporting herself. And another interesting thing is that it seems to be completely validated and on the record that the Fox mother, Margaret, that her hair turned completely white overnight.
Wow, that's different.
And this probably would have been sometime in May of 1848.
Well, they went through some pretty tumultuous times.
They did. They had to move. On occasion, they had a landlord who had tenants complain about all the booming noises of cannonballs being backfired against the wall. And of course, we're talking about, three well-mannered, gentle people who, I suppose there is always just this little outside thing that, yes, somehow they were faking all this, because you can't say, why would someone do that? Well, as many people as there are reasons why someone would do that, but after everything I've read, and especially the people who were people of letters who supported them. Now, speaking of people of letters, there were a bunch of professors from Harvard who got together and said, we have to prove that they're not doing this. We've got to establish this. And once again, from everything I seem to have crossed paths with, information-wise, were never able to debunk them.